Hi everyone, welcome back. We are continuing this week in Leviticus, starting with chapter 17. The heading for chapter 17 is the sacredness of blood, and it talks about a bunch of different things, including different kinds of sacrifices, what is and is not acceptable, what processes and practices are and are not acceptable. Jumping to verse 13. Anyone hunting, whether of the Israelites or of the aliens residing among them, again, not aliens like outer space. Alien just means they're from a different part of the world, like a different country. The aliens residing among them, who catches an animal or a bird that may be eaten, shall pour out its blood and cover it with earth, since the life of every living body is its blood. I have told the Israelites, you shall not partake of the blood of any meat, since the life of every living body is its blood. Anyone who partakes of it shall be cut off. Everyone, whether a native or an alien, who eats of an animal that died of itself or was killed by a wild beast, shall wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening, and then he will be clean. If he does not wash or does not bathe his body, he shall have the guilt to bear. Chapter 18 talks about different kinds of relationships, what is and is not acceptable. And if we jump down to verse 24, this I thought was pretty poignant. It talks about let's just read it. Do not defile yourselves by any of these things by which the nations whom I am driving out of your way have defiled themselves. So what that's saying is, if you remember, the Lord drove other countries out, other peoples out of the land to clear the land for the Israelites. He's saying that do not do what they have done. These things that I just outlined for you that I'm telling you is not acceptable. The people who lived in the surrounding communities, they probably do some of these things. That doesn't mean it's okay. Because their land had become defiled, I am punishing it for its wickedness by making it vomit out its inhabitants. You, however, whether natives or resident aliens, must keep my statutes and decrees forbidding all such abominations by which the previous inhabitants defiled the land. Otherwise, the land will vomit you out also for having defiled it, just as it vomited out the nations before you. Everyone who does any of these abominations shall be cut off from among his people. Heed my charge, then, not to defile yourselves by observing the abominable customs that have been observed before you. I, the Lord, am your God. Chapter 19, various rules of conduct. So we're going to read a bunch of this and see if it starts to sound kind of familiar to you. The Lord said to Moses, speak to the whole Israelite community and tell them, be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Revere your mother and father, and keep my Sabbaths. I, the Lord, am your God. Do not turn aside to idols, nor make molten gods for yourselves. I, the Lord, am your God. When you sacrifice your peace offerings to the Lord, if you wish it to be acceptable, it must be eaten on the very day of your sacrifice, or of the following day. Whatever is left over until the third day shall be burned up in the fire. If any of it is eaten on the third day, the sacrifice will be unacceptable as refuse. Whoever eats of it then shall pay the penalty for having profaned what is sacred to the Lord. Such a one shall be cut off from his people. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not be so thorough that you reap the fields to its very edge, nor shall you glean the straight ears of grain. Likewise, you shall not pick your vineyard bare, nor gather up the grapes that have fallen. These things you shall leave for the poor and the alien. I, the Lord, am your God. That just means back then they didn't have gardens like we have. Most of us have gardens today. They aren't small little backyard gardens. They were massive fields. So what the Lord is telling them is, don't pick everything. Leave a little bit for someone who's poor. Maybe they can't afford food, or they can't afford the land to have their own crops. Leave a little bit on there for them to glean, or travelers coming through. Because you couldn't just stop at a McDonald's if you're on a road trip. Then you couldn't carry everything with you. You didn't have cars, so it was leave the fields mostly for the poor. And then if you didn't notice, the top couple things were parts of the 10 Commandments. Continuing on, speaking of the 10 Commandments, you shall not steal, you shall not lie or speak falsely to one another, you shall not swear falsely by my name, thus profaning the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not defraud or rob your neighbor, you shall not withhold overnight the wages of your day laborer. You shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind, but you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. You shall not act dishonestly in rendering judgment. Show neither partiality to the weak nor deference to the mighty, but judge your fellow men justly. You shall not go about spreading slander among your kinsmen, nor shall you stand by idly when your neighbor's life is at stake. I am the Lord. You shall not bear hatred for your brother in your heart, though you may have to reprove your fellow man. Do not incur sin because of him. Take no revenge and cherish no grudge against your fellow countrymen. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Keep my statutes. Do not breed any of your domestic animals with others of a different species. Do not sow a field of yours with 2 different kinds of seed, and do not put on a garment woven with 2 different kinds of thread. Jumping down, verse 26. Do not eat meat with the blood still in it. Do not practice divination or soothsaying. Do not, it's like witchcraft. Do not clip your hair at the temples, nor trim the edges of your beard. Do not lacerate your bodies for the dead, and do not tattoo yourselves. I am the Lord. Verse 30. Keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Do not go to mediums or consult fortune tellers, for you will be defiled by them. I, the Lord, am your God. Stand up in the presence of the aged, and show respect for the old. Thus shall you fear your God. I am the Lord. When an alien resides with you in your land, do not molest him. You shall treat the alien who resides with you no differently than the natives born among you. Have the same love for him as for yourself, for you too were once aliens in the land of Egypt. I, the Lord, am your God. Do not act dishonestly in using measures of length or weight or capacity. You shall have a true scale and true weights. So what that means is you want to have it, the way they exchanged currency back then, a lot of the time, you would weigh physical silver, gold, bronze, what have you, on a scale to see what it was worth. And it's saying you can't have a scale that lies about the value of somebody else's gold or yours. You shall have a true scale and true weights, an honest ephah and an honest hin. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Be careful then to observe all my statutes and decrees. I am the Lord. Anything there sound familiar? Like things that you've heard of? Like mediums and fortune tellers? Not good. We are not permitted to consult any of that because it's core. It's witchcraft and things like that, divination. It seems perfectly harmless sometimes, but it's not. These are things that we still see today. You walk down the sidewalk and you see places where they do psychic readings, or maybe they read tarot cards. These are not things that Christians should be partaking in. We're not permitted to do that. All right, chapter 20, penalties for various sins. The Lord said to Moses, how far am I reading this? One moment. Chapter 20, I need to check my notes. I didn't mark it. Okay, yes, verses 1 through 9, chapter 20. The Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites, anyone, whether an Israelite or an alien residing in Israel, who gives any of his offspring to Molech shall be put to death. Let his fellow citizens stone him. That's sacrificing your children to demons, basically. I myself will turn against such a man and cut him off from his body of his people. For in giving his offspring to Molech, he has defiled my sanctuary and profaned my holy name. Even if his fellow citizens connive at such a man's crime, giving his offspring to Molech, and fail to put him to death, I myself will set my face against that man and his family, and will cut off from their people both him and all who join him in his wanton worship of Molech. Should anyone turn to mediums, again, back to mediums, should anyone turn to mediums and fortune tellers and follow their wanton ways, I will turn against such a one and cut him off from his people. Sanctify yourselves then and be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Be careful therefore to observe what I, the Lord, who makes you holy, have prescribed. Anyone who curses his father or mother shall be put to death. Since he has cursed his father or mother, he he has forfeited his life. So just again, to really drive this one home, we are no longer living under Mosaic law, but there are elements that are still they're still relevant to us today. We don't need to do these animal sacrifices. That's not how we are justified or saved. That's through belief in Christ and whatnot. And we'll get to that in the New Testament. But things that do hold through today is we are not to consult mediums. We are not to consult fortune tellers and things like that. All right, verse 22. Be careful to observe all my statutes and all my decrees. Otherwise, the land where I am bringing you to dwell will vomit you out. Just like the previous chapter talking about what will happen if you don't listen. Do not conform, therefore, to the customs of the nations whom I am driving out of your way, because all these things that they have done have filled me with disgust for them. But to you I have said, their land shall be your possession, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am giving it to you as your own, I, the Lord, your God, who have set you apart from the other nations. You too must set apart then the clean animals from the unclean, and the clean birds from the unclean, so that you may not be contaminated with the uncleanness of any beast or bird or of any swarming creature in the land that I have set apart for you. To me, therefore, you shall be sacred, for I, the Lord, am sacred, I, who have set you apart from the other nations to be my own. A man or woman who acts as a medium or a fortune teller, back to this again, shall be put to death by stoning. They have no one but themselves to blame for their death. What comes to mind, I don't know if you've heard this phrase, it's, we're jumping into New Testament Christian times, post-Jesus, we are in the world, we are not of the world. Have you ever heard that? I didn't understand it for the longest time when I was younger. It means that we live in this world. We live here on planet Earth. I'm in the United States. Most of us are, I'm assuming, because I know who mostly watches this. We live here. We live amongst all different types. We all have maybe classmates or friends or colleagues who are not Christians, who do not live like we do. We live in amongst it. We live amongst all this, the sin and people who don't choose to live their life for Christ. But we are not of the world. Just like God is saying here, just because the people who lived here before you did this, just because the neighboring cities and communities might do this, you are not permitted to do so. All right, moving on. Chapter 21. It's just the sanctity of the priesthood. It talks about what's acceptable for priests. Chapter 22, sacrificial banquets. Who can partake of certain sacred offerings? And we are at 13 minutes. I think we can continue. We will do chapter 23. We'll finish off with this. Chapter 23 is the holy days. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, the following are the festivals of the Lord, my feast days, which you shall celebrate with a sacred assembly. For 6 days work may be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath rest, a day for sacred assembly on which you shall do no work. The Sabbath shall belong to the Lord, wheresoever you dwell." Passover. These then are the festivals of the Lord, which you shall celebrate at the proper time with a sacred assembly. The Passover of the Lord falls on the 14th day of the first month at the evening of twilight. The 15th day of the month is the Lord's feast of unleavened bread. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first of these days you shall hold a sacred assembly and do no sort of work. On each of the 7 days you shall offer an oblation to the Lord. Then on the 7th day you shall again hold a sacred assembly and do no sort of work. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, when you come into the land which I am giving you and reap your harvest, you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits to your harvest to the priest, who shall wave the sheaf before the Lord, that it may be acceptable for you. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall do this. On this day, when your sheaf is waved, you shall offer to the Lord for a holocaust an unblemished yearling lamb. Its cereal offering shall be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, as a sweet-smelling oblation to the Lord, and its libation shall be 1/4 of a hin of wine. Until this day, when you bring your God this offering, you shall not eat any bread or roasted grain or fresh kernels. This shall be a perpetual statute for you and your descendants wherever you dwell. Wherever you dwell, it means wherever you live, whether you are, in Israel or not. Pentecost. Does that sound familiar? Because we still celebrate Pentecost today. We celebrate it in a different way, though. This is how they did it in the Old Testament. Beginning with the day after the Sabbath, the day on which you bring the wave offering sheaf, you shall count 7 full weeks, and then on the day after the 7th week, the 50th day, you shall present the new cereal offering to the Lord. For the wave offering of your first fruits to the Lord, you shall bring with you from wherever you live 2 loaves of bread made of 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour and baked with leaven. So it did have yeast. Besides the bread, you shall offer to the Lord a holocaust of 7 unblemished yearling lambs, 1 young bull, and 2 rams, along with their cereal offering and libations, as a sweet-smelling oblation to the Lord. 1 male goat shall be sacrificed as a sin offering, and 2 yearling lambs as a peace offering. The priest shall wave the bread of the first fruits, and the 2 lambs as a wave offering before the Lord. These shall be sacred to the Lord, and belong to the priest. On this same day you shall, by proclamation, have a sacred assembly, and no sort of work may be done. This shall be a perpetual statute for you and your descendants wherever you dwell. When you reap the harvests of your land, you shall not be so thorough that you reap the fields to its very edge. We're talking about this again. Nor shall you glean the stray ears of your grain. These things you shall leave for the poor and the alien. I, the Lord, am your God. Excuse me. New Year's Day. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, on the first day of the 7th month you shall keep a Sabbath rest, with the sacred assembly and with the trumpet blasts as a reminder. You shall then do no sort of work, and you shall offer an oblation to the Lord." The Day of Atonement. The Lord said to Moses, "The 10th of the 7th month is the Day of Atonement, when you shall hold a sacred assembly and mortify yourselves and offer an oblation to the Lord. On this day you shall not do any work, because it is the Day of Atonement, when atonement is made for you before the Lord your God. Anyone who does not mortify himself on this day shall be cut off from his people, and if anyone does any work on this day, I will remove him from the midst of his people. This is a perpetual statute for you and your descendants wherever you dwell. You shall do no work, but shall keep a Sabbath of complete rest and mortify yourselves. Beginning on the evening of the 9th of the month, you shall keep this Sabbath of yours from evening to evening." The Feast of Booths. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, the 15th day of the 7th month is the Lord's Feast of Booths, which shall continue for 7 days. On the first day there shall be a sacred assembly, and you shall do no sort of work. For 7 days you shall offer an oblation to the Lord, and on the 8th day you shall again hold a sacred assembly and offer an oblation to the Lord. On that solemn closing you shall do no sort of work. These, therefore, are the festivals of the Lord, on which you shall proclaim a sacred assembly, and offer as an oblation to the Lord holocausts and cereal offerings, sacrifices and libations, as prescribed for each day, in addition to those of the Lord's Sabbaths, your donations, your various votive offerings, and freewill offerings that you present to the Lord. On the 15th day of the seventh month, when you have gathered in the produce of the land, you shall celebrate a pilgrim feast of the Lord for a whole week. The 1st and the 8th day shall be days of complete rest. On the first day you shall gather foliage from majestic trees, branches of palms, and boughs of myrtles, and of valley poplars, and then for a week you shall make merry before the Lord your God. By perpetual statute for you and for your descendants, you shall keep this pilgrim feast of the Lord for 1 whole week in the 7th month of the year. During this week every native Israelite among you shall dwell in booths, that your descendants may realize that, when I led the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, I made them dwell in booths. I, the Lord, am your God. Thus did Moses announce to the Israelites the festivals of the Lord." We will stop there. So let us close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I will see you next Sunday.